At midnight, the world screams change, but some minds stay silent. And that silence isn't weakness, it's a signal. While fireworks convince millions they're being reborn, a smaller group feels nothing, no rush, no spark, no urgency. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Their brains might be healthier than most. Dark psychology teaches us this. When society agrees something must matter, the real power lies with those who resist reacting. These people don't reject New Year's Eve, they see through it. They understand that a number flipping doesn't erase patterns, trauma, or habits. So they stay still. They don't celebrate loudly, because loud celebration often hides fear. Fear that without noise, nothing has changed. And here's the tension most people miss. When someone treats New Year like a normal day, they're not empty. They're detached from illusion. But that detachment comes from somewhere darker. And once you see why, you'll never hear fireworks the same way again. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some people don't ignore New Year's Eve. Their mind literally doesn't register it. Days blur, weeks collapse, months lose edges. Dark psychology calls this temporal flattening. When the brain enters survival mode, symbolic time disappears. Not because the person is ungrateful, but because their nervous system is overloaded. Celebration requires mental space. Reflection requires safety. And these minds have neither. While others count down, they're counting bills. Deadlines, pressure, unspoken fears. Midnight passes quietly because their brain has been fighting all year. And it doesn't stop just because society says it should. Here's the twist. This isn't emotional numbness. It's adaptive focus. The mind prioritizes function over feeling to stay alive. But survival mode has a shadow. When time loses meaning, identity follows. And that's when New Year stops feeling like renewal and starts feeling like a threat. Because if nothing changed last year, why would this one? Now let's talk about the group nobody likes to acknowledge. The ones who stay home not by preference, but by absence. No invitations, no messages, no place to be when the clock gets close to midnight. Dark psychology reveals something brutal here. New Year's Eve is not a holiday, it's a social mirror. It forces comparison. Who's surrounded? Who's celebrated? Who's wanted? And for the invisible lonely, that mirror hurts more than silence ever could. So they rewrite the meaning. If it's just another day, it can't hurt me. This isn't denial. It's psychological self-defense. They scroll without posting, watch without reacting, sleep early not from boredom, but protection. Here's the tension most people miss. They're not rejecting joy. They're avoiding confirmation of what's missing. And when fireworks explode outside, their silence isn't peace, it's weight. But what happens when silence lasts too long and turns into identity? Some people don't celebrate because celebrating would feel disrespectful, not to tradition, but to pain. This is the group dark psychology calls the wounded passers. Their year didn't end, it hit them. Loss of someone, loss of stability, loss of who they used to be. Celebration assumes closure, but trauma doesn't follow calendars. So when society demands optimism on command, these minds refuse the lie. Treating New Year's Eve like a normal day is their way of staying psychologically honest. No forced hope. No fake rebirth. Just continuation. Here's the disturbing truth. For wounded minds, premature positivity can delay healing. Acknowledging pain without decorating it is strength. Quiet strength. But there's a cost. When you don't celebrate the ending, you also don't fully welcome the beginning. Let's zoom in on a group that's constantly misunderstood. The ones labeled cold, antisocial, detached, introverts. Dark psychology makes this clear. Introversion isn't about avoiding people, it's about how stimulation is processed. And New Year's Eve is a neurological assault. Loud music, crowds, forced emotion, performative joy. For an introverted nervous system, this isn't celebration. It's exhaustion disguised as fun. So they opt out, not to rebel, but to align. They don't need a countdown to reflect. They've been reflecting all year, quietly, privately, relentlessly. Growth for them isn't dramatic, it's internal. Here's the uncomfortable part. Public celebration often rewards emotional display, not emotional depth. And introverts refuse to perform meaning. They might acknowledge midnight silently. A thought, a realization, a decision they'll never announce. But here's the tension. When growth is invisible, society assumes it doesn't exist. Let's zoom out, because the real pattern only appears from a distance. On one side of the night, crowds, countdowns, raised glasses, synchronized emotion. On the other, quiet rooms, dim lights, familiar routines, untouched clocks. Dark psychology reveals something unsettling here. Collective celebration is a compliance test, not intentional but powerful. When everyone feels joy at the same moment, those who don't feel it are instantly marked as different. And humans fear being different. So most people celebrate not because they feel joy, but because not celebrating feels risky. The ones who treat New Year like a normal day aren't immune to pressure. They've just learned how to tolerate being out of sync. That takes psychological strength most people never develop. But here's the twist. Being out of sync long enough rewires identity. You stop asking, what should I feel? And start asking, what do I actually feel? And once that shift happens, rituals lose power, which raises a dangerous question. If you stop outsourcing meaning to the crowd, where do you get it instead? This is where the psychology turns dark. When a person stops trusting rituals, they start trusting patterns, behavior over belief, action over symbolism. Fireworks fade, habits don't. These people don't believe a year can reset itself. They've seen too much evidence. Trauma doesn't dissolve, personality doesn't reboot. Change only happens through repetition, not celebration. Dark psychology calls this ritual skepticism. It's often born from disappointment, promises made at midnight that never survived. February. So now, when New Year arrives, they feel nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just neutrality. And neutrality scares people because it can't be controlled through emotion. Here's the contradiction. This mindset produces the quietest form of growth. No announcements, no vision boards, no public vows, just small private adjustments that compound. But here's the danger. Without moments of emotional release, pressure accumulates silently. And when silent pressure finally breaks, it doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like withdrawal. Here's the part nobody wants to admit. Some people treat New Year's Eve like a normal day because hope feels expensive. When you've hoped before and paid for it with disappointment, the brain learns restraint. Dark psychology shows this clearly. Expectation is an emotional investment, and not everyone can afford to lose again. So they lower emotional volume, not because they're pessimistic, but because they're protecting remaining energy. While others toast to possibilities, these minds focus on endurance. They don't ask what could happen, they ask, what can I handle if it doesn't? This creates a calm that looks cold from the outside, but inside it's calculation, emotional budgeting, risk management of the psyche. Here's the unsettling realization. Many of these people used to celebrate loudly, hopefully, until life taught them the cost. And now the calendar changing doesn't feel inspiring. It feels irrelevant. But if hope is suppressed long enough, does resilience turn into resignation? Now we reach the uncomfortable mirror. When someone doesn't celebrate New Year's Eve, we instinctively judge them. We assume bitterness, sadness, dysfunction. Dark psychology explains why. Emotional conformity feels safer than emotional honesty. If everyone reacts the same way, no one has to question their own feelings. So the quiet ones become threats, not because they're negative, but because they expose a possibility. That joy on command might be optional. Here's the reveal. People who treat New Year like a normal day often have a different relationship with time itself. They don't believe beginnings are clean or endings are final. Life to them is continuous, messy, uneven. They don't wait for permission to change. They don't rely on collective momentum. They move when something inside shifts. And that's deeply unsettling to a culture built on shared moments. But here's the final tension before the ending. If growth doesn't need a calendar and meaning doesn't need applause, what happens to identity when no one is watching? This is the conclusion, the part that reframes everything you've seen. The people who treat New Year like a normal day aren't broken. They're quietly powerful. They don't chase fireworks. They preserve calm. They don't perform hope. They cultivate it internally. Dark psychology teaches us that real resilience often hides in plain sight. While the crowd seeks ritual and noise, these minds master self-soothing, reflection, and subtle growth. Their evolution is invisible, but unstoppable. And here's the twist. In a world obsessed with performance, the strongest humans are often the silent ones. The ones who survived trauma, managed expectation, and stayed true to themselves without public validation. So next New Year's Eve, when the fireworks explode and the countdown screams, remember the quiet rooms, dim lights, and untouched clocks. Both exist. Both are valid. Both are human. Maybe the real question isn't whether you celebrate. It's whether you can trust yourself enough to grow in the silence between the explosions. And that's where most of us actually live.